Unfortunately, the launch of the new iPhone is not going to do much in regards to stopping the continual downtrend and problems that Apple is having, with some on Wall Street calling for Apple to fall all the way down to $120 per share or more. But not all the news is actually true, and I know, guys, that's just shocking to say the least that the news is not actually true. So let's kind of separate fact from fiction and figure out exactly where Apple may very well fall to, because I can't say that there aren't problems there either, because that would be not true too. And I appreciate each and every one of you guys out there in the early thumbs up squad, so let's get this thing rolling. So let's address the China ban first, because actually it's the least of the concerns for Apple in my opinion, and to be quite honest, it's just absolute BS. It's not true at all. I mean, when I first read it, I just kind of rolled my eyes and went, what in the world? And of course, typical news media fashion, they take off, they run with that narrative, they throw the word Apple in there without actually telling you what did the actual policy say. It said that, they're basically allowing no foreign devices in their government facilities and all sorts of things like that, which makes perfect sense to me, actually. And shockingly, I know with China, usually a lot of the stuff they do makes absolutely no sense. But in this case, it makes perfect sense. And the US and other governments do exactly the same thing. And as a matter of fact, I'd say the US government is actually more strict in regards to that as opposed to the Chinese government. So when I kind of look at this whole thing in totality, it wasn't a shot at Apple, even though that makes for the best headlines and the most clickable articles and everything. It was all foreign companies in regards to China. And then whenever I compare it to similar US policies, the US policies are actually more restrictive and actually more against China than the China policy is. But who cares about the truth? We can just put out this narrative there, and then of course traders are going to trade it and all sorts of things like that. And that's just kind of the way the media works, guys. We all know that, and we all have to deal with it. And more importantly, it makes no sense for China to do that to Apple specifically, given the fact that Apple actually provides millions of jobs for Chinese citizens. And given the situation China's in, and nobody has, a clear picture of what's going on there, but we know that they're in trouble. The last thing they want to do is do something that would be anti-competitive for a company that provides so many jobs for their citizens. So all the way around, this just didn't make any sense from the start. And of course, it's now one of those things to where China's banning Apple. And that's the bottom line. And that's what most people think, even though anything could be further from the truth. But that does not mean, just because that's actually fiction, that Apple is not in trouble and not having problems in other areas. So let's jump onto that next. The truth of the matter is, global demand for smartphones has honestly slowed and has continued to slow and has continued to slow, and it's finally hitting Apple's bottom line. So even though I think obviously Apple provides the best phone out there with the iPhone, I have one, I've always had one for a very, very long time. I'm not sure I'll ever switch that. I can't deny facts like the global market is slowing down, if I could talk. The global market for smartphones is slowing down, and it is absolutely hitting Apple's bottom line, because we've had 2 consecutive quarters so far, and probably a third as well if we're to believe management, which I do believe management, where they're going to show those sales actually slowing further. So despite this release, unless there's just something that just blows everybody's mind beyond comprehension to push demand to some crazy level, we're going to continue to see that number slow down. And that doesn't mean the iPhone 15 is going to be a bust. It just means it may not be this huge monster catalyst like prior iPhone releases have been. But regardless, given Apple's past performance, especially kind of post-shutdown, they basically crushed it every single quarter after quarter after quarter. And it was just amazing. Every other company, as the stimulus money fell off, they saw revenues fall off, and Apple didn't. It just continued to improve, continued to get better, continued to crush those expectations, but it's all finally caught up to them now. And regardless of what the iPhone 15 does, I don't think it can do enough to keep up with those basically, post-shutdown type numbers that Apple put up, which means it's going to show a decline overall over the next year, which that right there is a big problem for Apple. So it looks like the growth story might have finally expired for Apple. They were able to stretch it out for so long, but now it looks like it's finally beginning to expire, and they're basically kind of hitting that peak point to where it's just basically all downhill from here. Or is it downhill from here? This is actually eerily similar back to 2015 to 2016, where Apple made all-time high after all-time high after all-time high, and then it quickly fell within a year 40% down before it finally bottomed out. The performance of Apple and the narrative around it at the time is almost identical to what is going on right now with Apple. Back then, you saw the largest drops in demand for the iPhone since it was released, and that happened quarter after quarter after quarter, which of course sounds exactly like right now, where they basically seen that, dramatic drop off that they haven't seen since 2016, quarter after quarter after quarter once again. Apple was actually trading at all-time highs back then, and by any measure of valuation was absolutely overvalued or trading at a premium or whatever the heck you want to call it. I'm going to be honest and call it overvaluation at that stage. It was doing that then. And of course, that's the exact situation we're in right now in regards to Apple and its valuation. It is trading extremely rich right now, coming off of all-time high after all-time high, just like back in 2015. And the narrative back then was exactly the same as the narrative we're hearing right now. Basically, there's no more growth because Steve Jobs isn't there, so there's no more products to come out to continue to push Apple to new levels. That's exactly what they said back then. I've heard that recently as well in regards to Apple. Nobody wants the new iPhone anymore. Nobody's going to upgrade every year. That idea is just dead now. And there's no more growth. The consumer is in a bad spot and not in a good spot. And the economy is kind of, not necessarily the best place in the world right now, which is going to add further pressure to people not wanting to buy premium Apple products. And of course, they need another hit. They need another game-changing product. They need something else to kind of push them to that next level because basically the growth story is over with. All of this sounds eerily familiar to exactly what we hear today and exactly what I'm hearing today overall from a lot of different folks. But it also may create an incredible opportunity because after Apple basically had its bad year per se, it went on an incredible 3-year tear, basically pushing itself to the top of the market and the biggest company in the world. Now that also doesn't mean that Apple, after this time period is over with, is going to go on another epic 3-year run like it did 2016 to 2019. It doesn't mean that at all. But there are opportunities and there are some things working in Apple's favor that could set itself up for a very nice run after this time period is over with. But that is only if they execute, which is something I think that they absolutely could do. I mean, who am I to doubt Apple's execution and whether or not they can execute into this next phase or not? To me, they're top 2 companies in terms of execution in the world. I'd argue that they are number 1. I'm sure you can make an argument for 1 or 2 other companies. But beyond that, nobody executes better than Apple. Nobody provides steady quarter in and quarter out growth like Apple does. And even if they have to change some things, even if they need to shift some things in order to get themselves back on track, there's no better management team I trust to do that than Apple's management team. There's maybe 2 or 3 management teams out there in the world that can actually do what Apple's been able to do over the past decade or so. So to me, that puts them in very rarefied air. And I don't know why I would doubt the management team over the long run in regards to executing to that. So in my opinion, I actually hope history does repeat itself. I hope it takes an epic beatdown over the next year because they have a lot of things working underneath that are going to be huge drivers into the future, huge revenue drivers into the future. They may very well be small now, but in the future, I think they're going to be massive revenue drivers. They're getting massive growth from services, for example, and a lot of other high margin products within kind of the Apple ecosystem there that are going to be future revenue drivers. But the hard part about it is a company as large as Apple that generates as much revenue as Apple. Heck, you could take those services revenue, apply it to any other company. Man, it's like an Nvidia earnings where just the revenue is just through the roof and it just pushes everything up through the roof. But because Apple's so large, it doesn't really affect the bottom line and the top line as much as it would any other company there. So it takes time for it to build out and for it to continue, for it to get to that point where it has a massive impact on the bottom line and the top line in regards to revenue. I also know that if iPhone sales aren't, great this year, if they're basically lackluster, that means it's set up for a huge year the following year because it's not like other phone companies and other types of phones where people are leaving the Apple ecosystem and moving on to another phone and they just decided not to upgrade to the iPhone this year. Therefore, that means Apple lost a customer. Nothing could be further from the truth. It just means they decided to wait a year and will probably pick up the newest iteration the following year, the iPhone 16 or whatever the heck they're going to call it. That's most likely the scenario that's going to happen, and it's going to set it up for a huge super cycle coming into the following year there. Just because people don't upgrade every year does not mean that they are losing market share to competitors because of that fact. The Apple ecosystem in general is far stronger than it was in 2016, so there's no reason for me to believe that that's not going to continue to hold true moving forward, and that's going to keep people more locked in the Apple ecosystem than they were back in 2016. So if they can see that sort of explosion on the back end, kind of coming out of that over the next few years, there's no reason to believe with as strong as the ecosystem is now compared to back to 2016, where it was, if you kind of look at the two, it's almost baby stages at that stage, given the differences. There's no reason to believe, especially with record number of services, a lot of records across the board on a lot of different product lines that aren't hardware specific. There's no reason to believe that people are going to leave that ecosystem and aren't going to come back to it the following year and basically slow off the pace of upgrading every single year, but get back on track with upgrading that following year. And fine, it may very well take 2 years, and that's okay too. I am more than willing to wait. I'm willing to be patient because that's part of being a good long-term buy and hold investor. I haven't bought shares in a couple of years now. I think the last buy I made is like $117 or so per share. So we might very well hit that spot. And of course, if you want to see all those buys in real time, make sure you check out the pinned comment down there, sign up for the group, and actually check it out just so you can get your free gift there, see if the group's right for you. But nonetheless, that's definitely a possibility again. And if it happens, guess what? I'm going to be a buyer. I'm going to be buying up as many shares as I can of this stock because it will be undervalued at that stage. And I trust Apple to turn it around. And in my opinion, the risk reward when it gets down to those levels is going to be absolutely insane. But you have to understand it's going to be a rocky road to get there. The media, the narrative, the fear, everything else is going to be completely against Apple during that time frame, just like it was back in 2015, 2016. So you have to be prepared for that. So make sure you have your valuation ready. You understand exactly what fair value is for Apple. Make sure you have your plan set, and then make sure you execute that plan, which we teach all of that in my group through 5 courses, live Q&As where you can talk to me directly, through our stock analyzer tool you get to use completely for free. We have the best 6- and 7-figure Discord out there, tons of exclusive videos. I put out 3, 4, 5 of those a week specifically for the group. Don't get released here on YouTube or anywhere else. Again, you can jump on our Q&As, you can talk to me in my DMs. There are tons of resources being added in there all the time, so make sure you check out the pinned comment down there and see if a membership's right for you. And click this video here if you want to see exactly what I'm buying in this market, and click here to see my exact plan for this market. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.